We're entering the final week of October, and I've saved the best for last. Mainly the episode of Invader that really took it to a whole new level when it comes to Halloween episodes. Now, I was familiar with Invader, but I wasn't a fan of it. I only remember his appearance in the fourth Nicktoons game, Globs of Doom, and I only remember watching one episode of it, but I don't remember it completely. And I was originally going to review the Christmas episode of Invader, but unfortunately, due to so many frustrations on doing the Christmas schedules, I ended up scrapping that review. And I don't think I'm gonna be doing it for this year. Just point that out right now. In this Halloween episode, Zim, who is new to the Halloween holiday, is extremely afraid of literally everything of what is really happening, while Dip, his enemy, is so paranoid when it comes to his imagination of everything around him is a lot more scarier than what Zim sees right now. Mainly the fact that his visions are literally a lot more complicated in comparison to what's happening in the world that he's in. And if this is part of Dip's character for how he was developed throughout this show, then I can guarantee you that this really led to something a lot more extraordinary when it comes to his life back home, and when it comes to the world that he's in, when it comes to his visions. I have to say, this is one of the most creative monsters or anything else that I've ever seen in any other cartoon, and I am not exaggerating, and I can totally understand that this show was ahead of its time, but also expensive to produce. The reason that Dip has these visions is because he was meddling with one of his father's inventions, which leads to an alternative dimension that he sees all these monsters / alternative world, to the point that he gets a lot more crazier and crazier by the second, and he needs Zim's help in order to get rid of the problem. But since that Zim and Dip aren't cooperative with each other, it's no surprise that Dip would go behind Zim's back for the sake of him being safe, but at the same time, no matter what he does, he would still be stuck into the dimension, unless if the enemies capture him instead of Zim. Even though this, along with the Christmas episodes, along with the other episode that I forgot, are the only ones I ever watched from this show, I can't deny that the creativity from this episode alone is really peak animation and peak direction. And for a show that came out in the early 2000s, it's really a shame that the expensive budget really drags this show down, even though Nickelodeon treat this show poorly when it comes to it being catered to more teens rather than kids. But if you really look at this episode, even as a Halloween episode, they did so many creative designs and directions that it's just difficult to overlook this when it comes to the point of view of Nickelodeon executives. I enjoy nearly all of the monsters in the alternative dimension when it comes to the designs and basically the environment when it comes to blue, purple. Like, blue and purple really makes this a lot more creativity when it comes to purple being the color of Halloween sometimes, and blue, not really a Halloween color, but oh my god, they really knew how to handle the color blue in this episode involving Halloween when it comes to the alternative dimension. The fact that they're called the Halloweenies really makes this a lot more creativity, because I highly doubt that the term Halloweenies will ever sound good or sound intimidating or in a bully perspective, humorous in a bully perspective, any better than what this episode has accomplished when it comes to the term. I'm being totally real that every time that the second half of the episode showcases the Halloweenies and Zim and Dip trying to find a way in order to get back to the real world out of this alternative dimension. But if they didn't team up, then they wouldn't be able to head home in the real world. Like, it really sums up that the alternative dimension is a lot more terrifying on how the real world is when it comes to the point of view of Zim, who is new to Halloween, who isn't into the Halloween spirit. And if we ended up having him going trick-or-treating, then I'm pretty sure it would have been lazy writing, which, in comparison to this episode, it's the far opposite of lazy writing when it comes to the alternative dimension being put into perspective. The characters in the alternative dimension have the word nightmare in their names, which is in the point of view of Dip, and I have to admit the fact that this kid is having more trauma than any other kid when it comes to Halloween, or basically anything outside of Halloween. I usually feel bad for him, but if his character was like this in previous and future episodes, it really made me feel like he can't be able to control himself, for him being a different type of character that can somewhat deal with trauma, but he can't be able to deal with trauma during the Halloween season when it comes to nightmare doppelgangers of the people in his world. When it comes to the main character of them all and the voice actor from Billy, from The Grim Adventures of Billy, Mandy, Zim in this show, along with how he was executed, I really underestimate on how he's willing to do the right thing all the while doing his own thing at the same time. But no matter what he does, if he doesn't do the right thing, then things will just probably get a lot more complicated. Granted, it may not be the case when it comes to his character in other episodes, but when it comes to this episode, the direction of how this episode wraps up on just trying to save him and Dib from the alternative dimension is literally the only alternative, judging of how that the life that Zim has is obviously different since that he's from outer space while everyone else around him isn't. Granted, I don't know much about the lore of Invader Zim, but what I've gained from this episode, it's obvious that Zim isn't really the type of person who enjoys holidays and thinks of them a lot more differently than other characters that were from other worlds and not from the human world where the holidays are new to them. If you don't believe me, the doppelganger of Miss Brittles ends up entering the real world, and when she enters it, she found literally everything around her, mainly the trick-or-treaters, disgusting in comparison to the viewpoint of what he sees in the Halloweenies in the alternative dimension. Honestly, that's honestly creative for how the Halloweenies see themselves normal, but when it comes to the real world, well, in their own vision, it's the alternative dimension. They find it extremely disgusting, which really made me amused. Granted, I'm not a fan of this show's humor, especially from this episode, but when it's done in a way that made me understand and how the creativity really makes it worthwhile, then it's rare for me to actually be amused with these types of jokes. When it comes to the ending, all the while experiencing the direction that they took when it comes to the alternative dimension that Zim and Dib were in until the final minutes of the episode where they escape the dimension. I really felt like that this Halloween episode needs to be watched at least once when it comes to its creativity and the execution. Like, if you really think that this episode is way ahead of its time, then you pretty much know for a while that cartoons that were 20 years old, and this show is 20 years old, can do so many extraordinary things that you wouldn't believe it was possible. I mean, granted, Other cartoons in the past, especially in the 90s and maybe 80s, can do some extraordinary things. But when it comes to this episode in particular, it really feels like the point of view of the creators, with the budget that they used a little too much, really made Invader Zim a one of a kind. I would have agreed that they could have toned down the budget, but when it comes to the art direction of this show, it really feels like that they wanted to make literally everything good for the sake of making this show's identity good on its own, which really says a lot that nowadays I don't think a show like this would ever be made when it comes to the art direction. There is an Invader Zim movie, don't correct me, but at the same time, when it comes to a TV budget, it's not gonna be possible. This episode is one of my favorite Halloween episodes, which, thanks to the creativity, I'm never going to see another Halloween episode have this much creativity. And I don't feel like I need to watch the other episodes to showcase on how the budget is the reason onto why the cancellation of the show was bound to happen. Because this episode was enough for me, even though there wasn't much CGI being used, unless if there were in some occasions, but done in a way that wasn't distracting. But less said about that, the better. I'm giving this episode a 9.25 out of 10.